Okay, assalamu alaikum everyone. Thank you for coming. We're going to start the program soon. But before we start, we'd like to open up with a quick recitation of the Quran. So without further ado, I'll call Muhammad to the stage.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الذين قالوا ربنا الله ثم فاستقاموا فلا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. أولئك أصحاب الجنة خالدين فيها جزاء ما كانوا يعملون. ووصينا الإنسان بوالديه إحسانا حملته أمه كرها ووضعته كرها وحمله وفصاله 30 شهرا حتى إذا بلغ أشده وبلغ 40 سنة قال رب أوزعني أن أشكر نعمتك التي أنعمت علي وعلى والدي وأن أعمل صالحا ترضاه وأصلح لي في ذريتي إني تبت إليك وإني من المسلمين. أولئك الذين نتقبل عنهم أحسن ما عملوا. أولئك الذين نتقبل عنهم أحسن ما عملوا ونتجاوز عن سيئاتهم في أصحاب الجنة وعد الصدق الذي كانوا يوعدون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Muhkam Tanzilih, surely those who say, our Lord is Allah, and then remain steadfast, there will be no fear for them, nor will they grieve. It is they who will be the residents of paradise, staying there forever, as a reward for that which they used to do. We have commanded people to honor their parents. Their mothers bore them in hardship and delivered them in hardship. Their period of bearing and weaning is 30 months. In time when the child reaches their prime at the age of 40, they pray, my Lord, inspire me to always be thankful for your favors, which you have blessed me and my parents with, and to do good deeds that please you, and instill righteousness in my offspring, I truly repent to you, and I truly submit to your will. It is from these people that we will accept the good they did and overlook their misdeeds, along with the residents of paradise, in fulfillment of true promise they have been given. Sadaqallahu.
Takbir. Jazakallah, Brother Muhammad, for the beautiful recitation. Next, I would like to introduce someone very important. You know, this young lady keeps us together. The reason we have this event, she keeps us focused. She helped organize it, book the room, calls me every day to make sure we're on task. Without further ado, please give a warm welcome to the president, Hamza Fayal.
Thank you. No, Azim does great work too, obviously. Okay, so alaikum everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to this event. It's great that this event has garnered so much interest and that so many people can benefit from the important discussions that Imam Zaid Shakir and CARE National Deputy Director Edward Ahmed Mitchell will be leading shortly. I'm Hamza, 3L and a co-president of Georgetown Law's Muslim Law Student Association, alongside Hyder, who's in the back, a 2L also at Georgetown. We would like to thank our sponsors and collaborators, George Washington's Muslim Law Student Association and the National Muslim Law Student Association, who is hosting its annual conference here at Georgetown. The conference is happening March 17th through the 19th. It's a 3-day event filled with speakers and activities for law students and those interested in the law to gain knowledge and build connections with their future Muslim colleagues. Please join us at the conference March 17th through the 19th here at Georgetown. It'll be on the main campus. So, studying history is not only gives us the tools to analyze and explain problems in the past, but positions us to see patterns that might otherwise be invisible to us in the present, like racial inequities and injustice hidden by microaggressions and legal tools that perpetuate systemic racism. Marginalized populations know this all too well within our communities, but tonight, in an attempt to peel back the curtain, we hope to engage in a more nuanced conversation on intersectionality of identities and hopefully find a common ground to build coalitions of resistance. Last night, I attended Georgetown Law's Black Law Students Association's general body meeting, and though I witnessed a lot of Black joy and success, I heard stories that made my heart wrench. I listened to upperclassmen recommend that newcomers only take classes where there's blind grading so that they can ensure no bias on behalf of the professors. I witnessed students also speaking about how common it was that they skipped classes after a law professor made racist comments or assertions or hurtful comments. And I also heard students recommend trainings on what to do in case you're stopped by police to prevent death in the Black community. The students recalled the murder of Tyree Nichols, a 29-year-old in Memphis, Tennessee, who was also beaten to death by 5 officers as he was calling out for his mom. I remembered my experience in Palestine on my Palestine trip this past winter break, where I witnessed systemic racism to Arabs of all kinds. I also witnessed the toll that this had taken on Palestinian law school students who I met in Birthday University, whose movement was restricted to the point that they had not visited Al-Aqsa Mosque in over 6 years and about a half-hour drive from their home. One student took me to see the 20-foot statue of Nelson Mandela that Palestinians had erected in the middle of a roundabout. They viewed him as a symbol of freedom, justice, equality, and hope that their country too would soon be free from the shackles of apartheid. I hope that we can draw from this example tonight and use the discussion that we're about to have to think about how we may draw parallels of discrimination and hopefully coalition build for the future. I encourage everyone to listen and think intently about the discussions that these amazing speakers will lead and raise any questions that will deepen the conversation. Our Secretary Azim has propped up the QR code that you can use to submit any questions for the Q&A session. So I would like to introduce our first speaker, Edward Ahmed Mitchell, who is an attorney and former journalist who served as the Deputy Director of Council on American Islamic Relations, the largest Muslim civil rights and advocacy organization in the United States. Mr. Mitchell previously served as the Executive Director of CARE Georgia from 2016 to 2020. During that time, the rights organization resolved numerous cases of anti-Muslim discrimination and opened its first office and expanded its staff to include a paralegal, a staff attorney, legislative aide, and communications director. In 2016, the chapter received CARE National's Chapter of the Year award. Before joining CARE Georgia, Mr. Mitchell practiced law as a criminal prosecutor for the city of Atlanta and worked as a freelance journalist for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Mr. Mitchell is a 2009 graduate of Morehouse College and also an alum of Georgetown University Law Center, where he won first place in the law school's annual trial advocacy competition, served as editor-in-chief of the Georgetown Law Weekly, and was elected president of the Muslim Law Students Association. Please give him a warm welcome.
Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi. So first, thank you to Mulsa for inviting me here to speak. It's really an honor to be back at Georgetown. When you leave law school, you never really want to come back. It's been somewhat eerie to be back in these rooms, sitting where I was cold called 10 years ago. But if you're going to come back to law school, this is the way you want to come back. Seeing so many Muslim students at Georgetown contributing to this school and getting ready to contribute to our society at large. So, Jazakum khair to all of you, and thank you again for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here and an honor to be here. I know that I am the only thing standing between us and hearing from Imam Zaid Shakir. So I will try to be briefer than lawyers usually are, inshallah. I was asked to come here tonight to discuss the systemic discrimination, the systemic bigotry, both from the government and private actors that not only the Black community, but in particular the Black Muslim community has faced for decades. That is a difficult discussion for me to have. And as I was trying to prepare for this, I really was having trouble deciding what to say. And the reason is that when I think of the Black Muslim community, and in particular, Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali, may Allah have mercy upon them, I don't think of them as victims. I don't first think about what was done to them. I think about what they did. I think about what they accomplished. I think about how they overcame all the challenges they faced. It's very difficult for me to have a conversation about the Black Muslim community and think about what we suffered. I can only really talk about what we accomplished. Nonetheless, there are absolutely incredible challenges that the Black Muslim community in particular has faced for decades, that we continue to face today. And in fact, I would say that many of the challenges my organization deals with here are really milder versions of problems that the Black Muslim community confronted 10, 20, 30 years ago. And so what I wanted to discuss briefly tonight, inshallah, are some of the challenges that the Black Muslim community faced years ago, how those challenges are somewhat similar or different to the challenges we're dealing with today, and then most importantly, how the Black Muslim community, in particular Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X, overcame some of those challenges. The first thing I want to note, though, before I dive into that, is the irony of today. It's the second day of Black History Month. We're here to discuss Black Muslim history and racism and discrimination, and you all saw what happened today. I was outside the Capitol building earlier today with other Muslim organizations, Arab organizations, Iranian organizations, and we were discussing the U.S. House's decision to kick Ilhan Omar off of the House Foreign Relations Committee. Now, the Speaker of the House explanation for this is, well, we had to do this because she has made anti-Semitic remarks in the past, and so she can't serve in House Foreign Affairs Committee. Well, that is ludicrous, as we all know. The real reason they kicked her off the committee, is because she is Black, because she is a Muslim, because she is a woman, because she is a visibly Muslim woman, and because she is outspoken, in particular about Palestinian human rights, the third rail of American politics. If Kevin McCarthy really cared about anti-Semitism, he would condemn Donald Trump, he would kick Marjorie Taylor Greene and Paul Gosar off their committees, and he'd apologize for tolerating their nonsense for all these years. But he doesn't do that. It's much easier to smear and silence a Black Muslim woman who speaks about Palestinian human rights. And so we saw happen to Ilhan Omar today as part of a long pattern of people singling out and targeting, attempting to silence and suppress the Black Muslim voice, dating all the way back to the 1960s and beyond. Now, when we think about what happened long ago with Brother Malcolm and Muhammad Ali and others, the difficulties they faced, the challenges they faced came from both government and private actors. In the government, they had to deal with everything from spying, infiltration, entrapment, deliberate attempts to sow division within their ranks, and of course, character assassination. All of this engineered and coordinated, not by some hate group, but by the government itself, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, other government agencies. When we think about Brother Malcolm X, you have to start, of course, with this time in the nation, right? Now, even though we all know that the Nation of Islam, got many beliefs wrong and was not quite a proper Islamic faith movement, they still were the first group of people in mass who identified as Muslim in America. And they did adopt many of the normal Islamic practices, like a belief in lifting the community up, brotherhood, discipline, sisterhood. And that really scared the heck out of the establishment in America. Because what they were saying, what Malcolm X in particular was saying, was that there should be Black unity, that Black people have the right to defend themselves physically if necessary, and that the civil rights movement was not going to solve the problems of Black America. And so what the government did to try to nip this movement in the bud was first, of course, to spy, to know what they're doing. So sending informants into the nation to track what they were doing, what they were planning. Number two was not only spying, but infiltrating. That is sending people into the organization who would pretend to be members and then would try to undermine the organization from within, right? That could be from anything from trying to make sure to sow division within the organization, trying to find opportunities to undermine their campaigns, their efforts, things they plan to do, and also entrapment. That is when you go to someone and they have no plan of their own to do something bad, but you try to convince them to do something bad, and then you arrest them at the last minute. So this was something that Malcolm in particular was a target of, both before and after he left the nation. We just found out a few years ago that when he passed away, when he was assassinated, he was at that very moment the target of a very systemic and coordinated attempt to spy upon, infiltrate, and undermine him. One thing we learned is an NYPD officer who passed away several years ago. On his deathbed, he confessed and wrote a letter confessing this, that he had worked with the FBI to, number one, entrap two of Malcolm X's most trusted bodyguards, convince them to supposedly take part in some plot, terrorist plot, and they were arrested several days before Malcolm was killed at the Audubon Ballroom. Number two, one of the bodyguards, this NYPD officer who was spying on Malcolm, was there as his bodyguard when he was assassinated. That is one of the people who was dedicated to protecting him was an NYPD officer who was actually there to spy upon him. Now, his family revealed all this, called for an investigation, and as you might imagine, nothing has happened. The Manhattan District Attorney said, we'll look into this. We reached out to the FBI, DOJ, and they said, we can't do anything because the Manhattan DA is looking into it, which is ludicrous, right? But what he experienced and whatever really happened to him in his death, we still don't know all the answers, but we do know for sure that he was the victim of a very targeted, systemic campaign to spy upon, entrap, and undermine his efforts, especially when he started talking about global Muslim unity and global Black unity, right? Which is where he was going at the end of his life, moving from just this kind of localized Black versus white thing to say, no. Racism is an international problem that can be solved with international Black unity, and that also the Muslim community must be united across race, across borders, across nationalities. That was a really scary thing for the establishment. And it's quite possible that, in addition to his steadfast speaking up for true Islam, got him killed and got him alive during paradise. And then Muhammad Ali, lesser known, but he was also a target of government spying and other such things, but the government had it easier with him. Because as you know, when he decided he was not going to be drafted to fight in Vietnam, they had a very easy opportunity to destroy his career, throw him in jail. And he knew that. He knew what was going to happen to him going in, but he still refused to bow down to the federal government. He refused to go and fight and kill people who had done nothing to him. Now, alhamdulillah, he didn't have to go to jail, but he lost the best years of his career, waiting and getting kicked out of the boxing arena. This is what he had to deal with, right? This is what he was confronted with, what he had to suffer. And again, what people were so afraid of with these two individuals was not only the fact that they were famous, but that they used their fame to advance positive causes, to challenge the establishment, to say that we believe that Black people have the right to stand up on their own 2 feet, to be outspoken, to be united, and to defend themselves. Change their name, change their religion. Even today, that stuff ruffles feathers. Imagine the 1950s, 1960s, how crazy it was for Cassius Clay to change his name to Muhammad Ali, to Malcolm X, to go on national television and say that white people were the devil, which they're not, but that's what he said, and that black people have the right to put people in their graves if they laid a hand on a black person, right? That would have been crazy to say today, and it was really crazy to say so long ago. And so the challenges they face for speaking the truth are, to be frank, much milder than the challenge that Muslims face today. We really have nothing to complain about as Muslims in America today. Yes, we have challenges. Yes, we have to confront them and take them seriously, but we can learn from the example of those who came before us as we confront modern challenges. And so the three things I want to note that I take from Muhammad Ali, Malcolm X, and others, lessons that I take as I try to do my work today, three things. Number one is I would say courage, but it's not really courage, it's talk about. Because both of these men, it wasn't that they had some unique lack of fear of people, it was that they feared Allah more than anything else, right? And that freed them to say, yeah, I'm going to take the risk of going to jail if I'm not going to fight in Vietnam. Yeah, I'm going to take the risk of dying if I go out and testify that there's only one God, and Muhammad, may peace be upon him, from the 7th century, not from the 20th century, is the last prophet of God, right? They knew that their career, their lives were in danger by going out and testifying to the truth. But they had this firm faith in Allah that allowed them to fear no one else, right? And so as we in America face the threat from the far right, who would like to deprive us of our rights, deport us, suppress us, silence us, sometimes kill us, that ability to not be afraid, to say that bring it on, but we don't fear you, we fear something much greater than you, is liberating. It's free and allows us to keep doing our work unencumbered. And at the same time, we're under pressure from the far left to give our values in exchange for popularity, to embrace the extremes of social liberalism, to be accepted and be popular. That's a real threat too. And we have to have the talk to say, no, we are not going to give up a single aspect of Islamic teachings to be accepted by you, to be popular, to get elected to office, to win an Oscar. Keep your Oscar, keep your congressional seat, right? We are Muslims and we are not going to be apologetic Muslims, right? That is a lesson we can take from Brother Muhammad, from Brother Malcolm, and a lesson that I think some of us have not always held on to. And I say that even about myself, that we make so many compromises to be popular. In our civil rights activism, I tell you, we do that. And to be frank, I'm tired of doing that. I'm tired of feeling like a coward. And so I think what we as Muslims have to do in the coming months and years is stand up to anyone who would threaten not only our community, but any other community. We have to say that justice is not just for us, but for all people. And we have to stand for justice in an Islamic way, as they did once before us. Second thing that I learned from them is, ironically, humility. Because when you think of Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali, the first thing you really might not think of is humility, right? They were both very brash, very bold. And some people would, I guess back in the day, racist people would say they were uppity, because they simply stood up for themselves and said the truth without caring what you thought about the truth, right? But that wasn't arrogance. In fact, they were deeply humble people, and that is seen in their ability to admit when they were wrong and change their mind and radically change their position about something, right? Brother Malcolm went through so many changes in his life, right? So many evolutions, because he always had that humility to admit when he was wrong about something. And when he saw the truth, what he believed to be the truth, he would embrace it wholeheartedly. So when he was in jail, right, he was an atheist. He was virulently opposed to religion in general, did not believe in God. But when he was confronted with teachings from the Nation of Islam, he recognized some truth in that. And he said, I'm going to accept this fully, right? Even though it meant leaving a life that I had up to that point. And he was fully dedicated to what he believed to be the truth at that time. No matter what anyone had to say about it, no matter how difficult it was, he was fully dedicated to what he thought was the truth. And then when he found out it wasn't completely the truth, when he went to Mecca and saw white Muslims and Asian Muslims and realized that no, white people aren't devils, that anyone can be a Muslim, that there's only one God, that he's never come to earth, and that the last prophet of God was Prophet Muhammad, may peace and blessings be upon him, he had no hesitation in radically changing publicly what he believed and what he stood for. And that took humility, right? And that is something that we can learn from. Muhammad Ali, definitely someone who was bold and brash, but one of the beautiful things about him is that even when he was beating people up, even when he was out there, saying all those poems and all that stuff, he would always say, I can only accomplish what I'm accomplishing by the will of Allah, right? He always acknowledged Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even before he left the nation. And after he left the nation, after years after Brother Malcolm was killed, he had the humility to, number one, admit he was wrong in not supporting Brother Malcolm when he left the nation. Number two, he had the humility to actually apologize for many of the insulting things that he had said about other boxers, like Joe Frazier and others. He makes really racist remarks about other boxers as part of the lead up to their matches, right? He later realized and admitted, I was wrong to say that. And in fact, the really, impactful thing that he said is he actually said that he believed that Parkinson's was actually I don't know if he said it was a test or a punishment from Allah, but he said Allah gave this disease to me to remind me that he is the greatest. And even say that, to think that takes a great deal of, I think, humility that we, I think, have to learn as individuals, as human beings, and as so many Muslims think that we got it all figured out. I'm 20 years old and I figured out things about Islam and humanity that people who have been on this earth for 60 years don't know, correcting scholars and all this stuff. It really takes humility to progress as a person. And so that's something that I think we all have to learn from as we do our work. And the last thing is a dedication to always learning more, because they were able to evolve because they never rested on their laurels. They never thought, I know everything there is to know. They always accepted there was something more to learn, more people to learn from. And so whether we're doing civil rights activism, whether we're law students in the height of our career, there's always something more that we can learn as professionals, as Muslims, as human beings, and that will keep us fresh and keep us advancing and progressing. And so again, as I think of these men, I find it really hard to talk about the difficulties they experienced because I'm so inspired by how they overcame the difficulties. And so as we move forward as a community, I just want us to say a few things. One, we should never think of ourselves as victims. Whenever I hear people say Muslims are marginalized in our organization, I say, take that word out. I hate the language of victimology. We have to be confident in how we present ourselves and how we speak of ourselves. We're not victims, we're not marginalized, we're not trying to get a seat at the table or get scraps from the table. We want to turn the table over and try to establish what we believe is a really just society and a just way of life. So we're not victims. Number two, that we never feel the need to compromise Islam, again, to be accepted or to be popular, because that way disaster lies. It was Ben Franklin, I think, who said, those who would give up liberties for security deserve neither. And I think the same is true. Those who would give up Islam for security deserve neither. And so we have to hold on to our faith. And through that faith, eventually, we will find success. Even if we're hated for a while, even if we're unpopular for a while, as Malcolm and Muhammad were, eventually they became beloved, right? To the point that Malcolm X's dear wife, who died in the 90s, her funeral was attended by the highest leaders of America. And of course, we all know that Brother Muhammad Ali is, of course, one of the most beloved figures in the world. And then finally, I think, is the embrace of cross-racial unity, cross-national unity as Muslims, right? The reason we are experiencing so many difficulties internally and externally, nationally and internationally, is we are divided, right? I'm from this country, you're from that country, I'm this school of thought, you're that school of thought, I'm this denomination, you're that denomination. The people who want to suppress us don't care if you are Sunni or Shia or Hanafi or whatever else, or whether you came from Syria or Iran or Malaysia. All they care about is you are Muslim. That's the bottom line. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will settle the differences between us. In the meantime, unity is the way we will confront the threat of global anti-Muslim bigotry. Unity is the way we'll advance justice in this country and the world. I can tell you, being an activist, we are under immense pressure to stop advocating for Palestine. We are under immense pressure to embrace the extremes of social liberalism. We are under immense pressure to go along to get along. My organization, CARE, we're not perfect. I think we've made mistakes, as many other organizations have. But I will tell you, we are dedicated now, inshallah, to making sure that we try to reflect the best of the legacy of Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X. And I hope that you all, as you continue through law school, you think about what you're going to do in your life, you take these lessons from Malcolm and Muhammad Ali and instill them in yourself, of humility, of the belief in unity, of the dedication to standing up for what is right and against what is wrong, and fear of no one but Allah. And you will find success that way. Sooner or later, no matter what career path you choose, no matter what you do in life, inshallah, that way lies success. So I want to thank you all for having me today. It's really an honor to be back at Georgetown with all of you, and I'm so excited to turn it back over to your dear president so we can hear from Imam Zaid, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Let's please give Mr. Mitchell another round of applause. That was great. It's such a pleasure for us to have alumni come back and speak to us about such important issues. So before we introduce Imam Zaid, I just want to bring one young gentleman up to the stage. This guy, such a pleasure to be around him. He's like our spiritual glue of our mosque. He gives us halakas. He leads our Jummah sermons. It's just great to be around him, and it's an honor to have a Zaytuna graduate in the law school with us to provide us with so much knowledge. So without further ado, please give a warm welcome to Abdullah Qureshi. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Our speaker today is a truly special one. For those of us who know Imam Zaid, we know that there's no introduction that I could give that could truly do him justice. But for those of us who are less familiar, I'll try to provide a brief introduction. Imam Zaid, in the broad American Muslim community, is known fondly as the people's Imam, just as Muhammad Ali was known as the people's champ, because he has really represented and struggled for the people his entire life. And truly, if there were any one person that could be the Imam of Muslims in America, it is Imam Zaid, who is universally loved and respected by Muslims across the spectrum. Coming from very humble beginnings, Imam Zaid converted to Islam in 1977, and he made it his mission to improve the lots of all people in this country. He founded multiple organizations and communities, guided many people to rectify their lives and themselves, and spearheaded multiple civil rights campaigns and community renewal efforts, both within and outside the Muslim community. Eventually, he left to Syria, where he spent 7 years studying Islamic sciences under some of the greatest scholars alive. When Imam Zaid returned, he continued leading efforts to reform people and communities, and he's been at the forefront of these efforts for well over 40 years now. A gifted speaker and author of multiple books, Imam Zaid is repeatedly ranked as one of the most influential Muslims in Islam by the Muslim 500 over the past decade. Imam Zaid was also the chosen spiritual advisor of Muhammad Ali. He spent much close time with him between about 2008 until he passed in 2016. Imam Zaid was chosen to lead his funeral prayers and procession in front of the nation. Imam Zaid is also the co-founder of Zaytuna College, the first Muslim university in America, where he taught for many years and inspired really every student that walked through his halls. He is an example to all Muslims. He travels the country in tireless service to a degree that seems impossible to even the most seasoned speaker. And despite all of his accolades and fame, he remains one of the most humble and generous men I've ever met. So it is therefore a great honor and privilege for me to welcome to the stage a man I consider to be a personal mentor and model and teacher, Imam Zaid Shakir.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. ربنا لك الحمد كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك لعظيم سلطانك سبحانك لا نحصي ثناء عليك أنت كما أثنيت على نفسك. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا وحبيبنا وقرة أعيننا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. Alhamdulillah, it's a great pleasure and honor to be here at Georgetown University. I actually studied here at Georgetown Arabic. My school was American University, but they didn't teach Arabic there, so you could at that time study at Georgetown, American, George Washington, Howard University, University of Maryland, or the Catholic University of America. and in this consortium program. If your school didn't offer the course, you could go to any of those schools. So I came here to Georgetown on campus and studied Arabic for 2 years to fulfill my language requirement at American University. Before going further, I'd like to just thank dear brother Ahmed Mitchell for his comments, and to put an exclamation point on never look at yourself as a victim, because not only is it analytically fallacious, it's also a complaint against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because anything that we're afflicted with is decreed by our Lord. And if we're saying we're a victim, we're saying our Lord is victimizing us. No, our Lord tests us. And he tries us sometimes with fire in very challenging, difficult ways, but we're not victims. We're victors. And Allah Ta'ala give us tawfiq and bless us to realize that. My presentation here is going to go from the extremely informal to the extremely formal. The extremely formal being actually just reading an article I wrote, because this subject is so deep and vast. I found myself like all over the place thinking about it, and I just stumbled upon this article, and I thought that really captures what I would like to convey tonight. Before we get to that though, this is the extremely informal part. I recently was in Gambia in West Africa. And well, before I get to that, let me say this. This is, as I understand, Black History Month lecture. And I think it behooves us to understand just a little bit of history surrounding Black History Month. Black History Month was conceived of not as Black History Month, but as Black History Week by the great African-American historian Carter G. Woodson, the second African-American to gain a PhD from Harvard University after W.E.B. Du Bois being the first. Carter G. Woodson, famously known probably for his book, The Miseducation of the Negro, and envisioned celebrating the lives and the contribution of African Americans to this country. And he chose February. A lot of people say, well, the government chose February for Black, this is an urban myth, for Black History Month because it's the shortest month. And that's how much they care about us. But that's an urban myth. Carter G. Woodson chose the second week in February for Black History Week. And this was in 1926, because the second week in February marks the birth dates of both Abraham Lincoln on the 12th of February and Frederick Douglass on the 14th. And that's why Carter G. Woodson chose February, specifically the second week in February for Black History Week. In 1969, Kent State is probably, most of you only know Kent State for the massacre that took place when students, they were protesting against the Vietnam War, the massacre at Kent State and the massacre at Jackson State. But Kent State was the first campus where the African-American professors and students organized a Black History Month, first discussing it and presenting the idea in 1969 and then 1970, after actually celebrating it, being joined by many other campuses, until 1976, when President Gerald Ford, of all people, actually initiated a formal nationwide Black History Month. So that's just a little history on Black History Month. To go to the Gambia, Black history is a history that's compelling. It's a history that is deep. It's a history that behooves every Muslim and a person who might not be a Muslim to know about. But it's also generally, particularly until the last 30 years, it was a very incomplete history, because Muslims were almost totally written out of African-American history, despite being at the very heart of that history. If you're familiar with even the history of Africans in the Americas as a result of Spanish and subsequently English slavery. The first slave revolt involved Muslims. In 1522, on the plantation of Don Carlos Colon, who was the son of Christopher Columbus. Christopher Columbus took the Spanish name when he migrated from Italy to Spain, and he took the name of Cristobal Colon. And his son, Don Carlos Colon, was the plantation owner in the present-day Dominican Republic that had some Wolof Muslims on it. Those Wolof Muslims, being pastoral people, commandeered some horses and as experienced cavalry soldiers, overwhelmed the Spanish garrison, escaped into the forest, and established a maroon community that endured for many years before it was finally broken up. And this is indicative of the place that Muslims occupy in the history of Africans in what will become the Americas. In this country, we could talk about the life of Ayub bin Suleiman, Job bin Solomon, the fortunate slave. The oldest extant work of African-American literature is the biography of a Muslim slave, Job bin Solomon, who wasn't just a slave, he was a scholar who studied in Timbuktu at the great Sankorian University, as did Ibrahim Abdurrahman, Prince among slaves, as popularized in Terry Alford's brilliant work of history, Prince. And then Unity or UPF is a Muslim production company, made a film, a kind of mixed genre feature film, documentary film about the life of that Muslim slave. The most prolific of all the slave writers, Umar bin Said, who wrote 31 pages from memory of the Risale of Ibn Abi Sayyid al-Qayrawani. And that's extant. Those 31 pages are still in a museum in Atlanta, Georgia. You can go read it yourself if you could read Arabic, particularly Arabic in the West African script, which I've not mastered. So someone have to put it in the more standard Arabic script. I could read it then. So these are just indications, but that history was largely neglected. Even when we talk about Malcolm X, when Alex Haley, who co-wrote the autobiography of Malcolm X with Malcolm, decided to trace his roots, and that journey became known as Roots. How many of you are familiar with Roots? They redid it a few years ago. He ended up in a Muslim village in the Gambia. And so last month I was in the Gambia, and I went to Kunta Kinte's village, to that Muslim village. And people know the names of their family members that were taken. They know their histories. They know where they lived. So this first picture, Kunta Kinte's house was behind this bicycle. That's where Kunta Kinte lived. Kunta Kinte was a hafiz of Quran. He studied the Quran like these children, writing on wooden slates, an ancient practice, just like these children, sitting literally at the feet of the scholar in his village, like these children. And the power in this experience for me, it shows that Islam is in good hands because it's with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. European encroachment came. The North African slave trade, North Atlantic slave trade came. It went. Colonization came and it went. People that are still dealing with the vestiges of neo-colonization, but throughout it all, people were sitting at the feet of the Sheikh, like these children, memorizing the Quran, and that's exactly what Kunta Kinte was doing. And the fact that no one knows that, despite the power that can have in transforming the lives of so many lost people in our community. It's not just a tragedy, it's a travesty. And part of our responsibilities as Muslims is to make this history known. To make Kunta Kinte's history known. That there was a Muslim who had memorized the Quran, who was stolen from his people and shipped to the Americans and forced to give up his name and had his foot cut off because he persistently ran away. That's our history. That's part of our history. And we can't neglect it. We can't ignore it. And we shouldn't neglect it. And we shouldn't ignore it. So that's the informal part. The formal part deals primarily with Muhammad Ali, was the focus of the article, but I'm going to revert back to the informal and talk a little about Malcolm when I'm done with this. My understanding is I have 50 minutes. So if you think I'm going too long, don't blame me, blame the organizers. They could always give me the Apollo Theater hook. I can just see me. So I'll start. This article was called God's Plan for Muhammad Ali. The analytical methods which postmodernism possess have some sad features. Some, there's benefit. One is the rejection of the idea of greatness. These methods leave no space for great men or women. What we find instead is an unrealistic leveling that reduces every prince to a valet and confirms upon every valet princely pretensions. For example, Malcolm X, eulogized by Ossie Davis as a, quote, shining black prince, a man who had the courage to change when his commitment to truth dictated that he change, as illustrated in his autobiography, is reduced to a conniving hustler who is constantly reinventing himself in Manning Marable's deconstruction of his life. More disturbing and perhaps of greater import for Muslims is the removal of God as an active agent in history. Providence has no bearing on historical outcomes. Similarly, divine guidance is not to be considered when examining the complicated array of decisions and choices that lead any of us to become who we are. There is only a boring, random collection of unrelated accidents, which, if they are to be examined systematically, it will be through a framework provided by sociology or anthropology. Some would call the whole arrangement new school. Being an old school guy myself, I've never been impressed with the new school. It is too predictable and intellectually hegemonic. There must be ways of assessing reality that differ from the stark materialism bequeathed to us by the modern and now postmodern West. Islam provides us with one of those alternative approaches. For more than any other system, it demands that the divine be considered in all things. It is through the prism of Islam, specifically through the unfolding of God's plan, that I wish to examine some of the major aspects of the life of Muhammad Ali. May God have mercy on him. Moving away from these introductory remarks, I contend that Ali would never have become Ali had not God both prepared him for his times and prepared his times for him. That preparation began with Ali's deeply religious mother, Odessa Lee Clay. His mother's deep religiosity left an indelible imprint on the young Ali. That imprint would influence Ali becoming a dedicated member of the Nation of Islam and a faithful follower of Elijah Muhammad. It would also sustain Ali once he moved away from the Nation of Islam under the leadership of Imam Zaid Muhammad, and later in his life when he became more deeply influenced by more traditional expressions of Islamic spirituality. Of course, it is highly possible for a child growing up without the influence of a devout parent to end up deeply religious. However, the odds are greatly enhanced when those closest to you during your formative years are themselves devout. In both his home and in church, Ali was being prepared for a religious life. This is something all who knew Ali recognized. Like Moses, his being placed in a particular house was one of the first notable acts of divine intervention in Ali's life. This is also true for Malcolm X. Malcolm X didn't grow up in any house. He grew up in the household of two dedicated followers of Marcus Garvey. His father was an advocate and an activist in the Garvey movement, and his mother was one of the primary writers in the Garvey newspaper. In any case, we'll come back to Malcolm briefly. Ali was also conditioned, in other words, Ali grew up in a Pan-African sort of proto-Islamic environment at home. And so he deviated away from that for well-known reasons, particularly the death and murder of his father, but he came back to his roots. So it wasn't a question of Malcolm X rejecting a life of criminality and then becoming religion. It was a question of Malcolm X growing up in a house that was both religious and socially and politically conscious, because of circumstances being moved away from his roots and then coming back to his roots. In any case, Ali was also conditioned in childhood to make the kind of history-altering choices he would make later in life. He knew from a young age that there was danger in the path of a Black man in America. Hence, whatever decision you made, you need to be prepared to die for it. This sense of danger was drilled into Ali's consciousness by the brutal lynching of Emmett Till. Ali would never forget that Mississippi murder of a young man his own age. It informed him, and he talks about this in any biographical work that you might read about Muhammad Ali. It informed him from the depths of hatred some men could sink to when you offended them, either via imagined or petty offenses, such as that attributed to Emmett Till, or in highly charged ways, as Ali would later do. That being so, Ali knew that when you took a stand, you had best be prepared to die for it. Hence, he was dead serious when he said, commenting on the hell he caught when he refused induction into the United States military, quote, whatever the consequences may be, I will not renounce the religion of Islam. I'm ready to die. If you put me before a firing squad tomorrow, I'm ready to die. There's a 24, 5-year-old young man making that statement, and he meant it. Both that consciousness and courage were necessary gifts that God gave to Ali. Ali's boxing career itself began with what can only be described as an act of God. Of course, as Muslims, we believe that everything is an act of God. I stated here for emphasis that particular act was the theft of Ali's brand new bike. Such an occurrence is common. I can remember my bike being stolen as a young boy. However, what happened next is extremely uncommon. First of all, Ali reported the theft to the police, something I never considered doing when my bike was stolen, because the relationship between the police and those living in the vast public housing project I grew up in was such that you did not think of inviting the police to intervene in such matters. Young kids in our community were usually trying to avoid the police at all costs. Ali, however, went to the police, and the officer he found in segregated Louisville, Kentucky, happened to be a white boxing coach, Joe Martin, who had taken an interest in helping young African-American youth. Instead of blowing off the skinny 12-year-old, he suggested he learn how to fight if indeed he were to punish the thief were he to find him. There are tremendous odds against this series of events occurring as they did. God had a plan for Ali, and Ali was always aware of that fact. In preparing Ali for the world, God blessed him not only with incredible physical ability. Perhaps during the early phase of his boxing career, he possessed the fastest hands in the history of the sport. He was also blessed with great physical beauty and a quick poetic wit. There had been many talented boxers before Ali. We could mention in that regard one Ali idolized, Sugar Ray Robinson. However, none possessed Ali's charisma and beauty, two attributes which would serve him greatly via the medium of television. In that regard, God brought Ali onto the national stage at a time when television was just emerging as a household standard, and Ali was tailor-made for television. Rather bombastically threatening Sonny Liston, predicting the round in which his next opponent would fall, playing around with the Beatles or bantering with Howard Cosell, Ali was the first athlete whose fame and or notoriety was boosted to considerable heights by television. A medium that had prepared Ali, a medium had been prepared for Ali, which would be instrumental in projecting him onto the global stage. Like John Kennedy, whose improbable victory over Richard Nixon in the 1960 presidential election was attributed in large part to his televised persona, Ali's rise, initially as Cassius Clay, was greatly enhanced by television. Had he appeared even 5 years earlier, he would have been just another talented boxer, little known outside of the fight world. Thereafter, God guided Ali to Islam. When one considers the likelihood of a brash, charismatic, highly successful athlete with the prospects of making millions of dollars because of the aforementioned emergence of television and the tremendous revenues it opened up for top professional athletes, some of you are familiar with the picture of Ali sitting on a pile of cash. Cassius with the cash. I should have put that up there. One must concede that Ali's Islam itself is a miracle. God guided Ali to Islam, and in so doing made him one of the most popular men on earth. For the entire Muslim world could relate to a boxing champion named Muhammad Ali. Ali became their champion. Had he remained Cassius Clay, had he not entered into Islam, he would not have gained that degree of global recognition and popularity, no matter how talented a fighter he was. Ali's popularity was further enhanced when he took his stand against participating in the Vietnam War. By refusing induction into the United States military, Ali suffered the loss of his title, the loss of his livelihood, and the constant threat of losing his very life. However, he would not back down. By so doing, he was facing up close the same forces that were ravaging not just Vietnam, but countless other countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. In defying those forces, Ali was now the champion of not just the Muslim world, but the entire part of the planet known at that time as the Third World. As he left the 1960s, stripped of his title but steeped in his dignity, Ali was the most popular human being on earth. Throughout the ordeal he was forced to endure because of the stand he had taken, Ali was acutely aware of the dangers he faced. As we mentioned earlier, he was always haunted by the specter of Emmett Till's murder. Shortly after he became Muslim, his most significant early mentor, Malcolm X, was assassinated. Soon after Ali's defiance of the US war machine, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was gunned down. In all likelihood, because of the stand he had taken against the war in Vietnam. Yet Ali persevered, and he never resorted to taking a bodyguard. He knew that God was with him. When asked if he had a bodyguard, he famously responded, "I have one bodyguard. He has no eyes, yet he sees. He has no ears, yet he hears. He remembers everything with the aid of mighty memory. When he wishes to create a thing, he orders it into existence, but his order is not conveyed by words, which take a tongue to follow, or the sound carried in ears. He hears the secrets of those under quiet thought. Ask me, who is that? That's God, Allah. He's my bodyguard. He's your bodyguard. This is a man who's threatened with death every second of his existence. Through his courage and defiant speech, Ali had captured the hearts of the struggling, oppressed Muslim and third world masses. He commanded the global stage. Yet there was another audience God prepared Ali to capture, white America. Ali's refusal to be inducted into the army occurred at a time when the movement to end the war in Vietnam was just building up momentum. His courageous stand, taken as the heavyweight champion of the world, instantly made Ali a cause celebre of the anti-war movement in this country. It also catapulted Ali, despite his involvement with the Nation of Islam, into the hearts of America's rebellious white youths. As those youth, many of them attending elite universities like Georgetown, made their way into professional and public life, Ali would benefit in many tangible and intangible ways from the connections he was making with them. Not all of white America was anti-war, though. Not all of white America had been able to cleanse itself of the persistent stench of racism to an extent that would allow it to embrace such a fiery young Black voice. The conquest of larger swaths of white America came not through Ali's words, but through his silence. As Ali once famously dubbed the Louisville lip, owing to his loquaciousness, lost his speech, he began to speak with the tongue of his state. It was that tongue that was able to touch the hearts of millions of white Americans who pitiably were not prepared to listen to the young Ali or Malcolm or Dr. King or Fannie Lou Hamer or the angry Black youth flooding the streets of Detroit, Newark, Watts, Hartford, Chicago, Washington, D.C., and elsewhere throughout the nation. That silence allowed those who refused to listen to Ali or the masses he spoke for to finally hear him. God sent them a voice they could understand. That voice was a silent Ali. Contrary to what some may believe and have stated, that voice was not the passive voice of weakness, defeat, and resignation. It was a powerful voice that roared through its dignity, love, compassion, perseverance, and its matchless affirmation of the ability of the human will to triumph over the most desperate circumstances. It roared in the presence of kings and presidents. It roared from the top of the Olympic Stadium in Atlanta, Georgia. It roared even after his passing in Louisville as Ali's body wove through the streets of his childhood home en route to his final resting place. It roars even today for those who care to listen. Finally, it was God's plan to enter Ali, in my estimation, into a loving relationship with the divine, nearness and service, a relationship Muslims refer to as wilaya. Ali was once asked by a young man in Ireland what he planned to do after boxing. Ali's response that he planned to use his remaining days to prepare to meet his Lord. God facilitated that preparation, among other ways, by taking Ali's speech. The ensuing silence led to the contemplation, serenity, reflection, devotion, and service necessary to cement Ali's relationship of wilaya with his Lord. Finally, just as God ordered Abraham to proclaim the pilgrimage among the nations of the world, promising that he, the divine, would ensure that every soul would hear his voice. He made sure that all the nations of the world, even those who refused to listen, would hear Ali's voice. It was always a voice calling for peace and ultimately to love, mutual respect, and goodwill towards all. As we stand today in a nation rife with polarizing hatreds, resurging racism, entrenching tribalisms, and a debilitating refusal to listen to each other, it is time we started listening to Ali. It is God's plan. Thank you. Few remaining minutes, I want to get informal again and talk a little bit about Malcolm. Malcolm X, again, as I mentioned, Malcolm was a culmination of all of the forces that created what has been referred to as the Black Atlantic, or the African people forced by the institution of slavery into a diaspora across the North Atlantic, from Great Britain to the eastern coast of the United States, through the Caribbean and the eastern coast of South America, particularly in Brazil, but even beyond Brazil, moving primarily northward towards Colombia, and then into Panama and out into the Caribbean. The Black Atlantic, that diaspora, was really what produced Malcolm X. Malcolm X's mother was born in Grenada in the Caribbean, who, to her mother having been raped by a white man and leading to the physical features that Malcolm and other members of his family would represent. His father and his upbringing, their connection with Garvey being a true Marcus Garvey, a true child of that diaspora, from his Jamaican roots, traveling to London, in London hooking up with Dusay Muhammad, a Muslim of mysterious origin. Some say Sudanese, Egyptian, some say he was a convert, either a British or African-American convert. In any case, Dusay Muhammad became very much involved in both the Pan-African and the Pan-Islamic struggles. And Dusay Muhammad became one of Garvey's primary mentors when Garvey traveled from Jamaica to London. Marcus Garvey links up with Dusay Muhammad. Dusay Muhammad mentors Garvey in both Pan-Africanism, and Garvey's influenced by his Islam, and that comes through his newspaper. One of the primary writers in that paper was Dusay Muhammad, and I'm sure they're archived here at Georgetown or somewhere in DC. Definitely CIA has them. But you'll see that Dusay Muhammad is writing about Pan-Islamic themes in Garvey's paper. Dusay Muhammad then goes to Detroit. So there's a book, Islam in Old Detroit. It's an incredible study. He then becomes a unifying this African-rooted figure, African, Sudanese, Egyptian, Afro-British, Afro-American, whatever his origins. He becomes a unifying force in that community that brings the Iraqi, Lebanese, Yemeni Muslims, Shiis, Sunnis all together, and they form the roots of a very vibrant, strong community. And in any case, those forces are shaping, as mentioned earlier, Malcolm's parents. His father is a staunch advocate for Garvey's message. His mother is a writer in the Garvey paper. While she's in Grenada, she attends an elite Anglican grammar school. She's fluent in French and English, and I think one other European language. And she's very, very astute and prolific writer. That's the home Malcolm grew up in. Malcolm would go with his father when he preached a message and listen to his father. So in any case, Malcolm does not come out of a vacuum. And both his father and mother are very influential in shaping him into becoming who he ultimately becomes. Malcolm then is influenced by the Nation of Islam, which is a movement itself that is sort of this journey of the African American people back to Islam. So in some areas of this country, 50% of the slaves in a particular community were Muslim. Overall, conservative estimate 20%. Some areas such as Virginia, Southern Virginia, the islands off the coast of Georgia and Carolina, and the Louisiana Delta where rice is cultivated. Rice, as many of you know, is an extremely labor-intensive crop that takes a lot of expertise to grow. So the plantation owners who grew rice preferred slaves from the Senegambia region, the region Kunta Kinte came from, because of their expertise in growing rice. Those are rice growing areas in Africa. And that's an area that's 90% Muslim. And so it's no coincidence that when Alex Haley traces his roots and Kunta Kinte is enslaved in Southern Virginia after landing in Annapolis, Maryland, that he ends up in a Muslim village in the Senegambia. That's no coincidence. It's no coincidence when a popular American filmmaker whose name I forget made a movie about a slave in the Louisiana Delta. That movie was called Mandinka. Because Mandinka are a Muslim tribe. Kunta Kinte is a Mandinka. They're the dominant tribe along with the Wolof. But in Gambia, they're the dominant tribe. So Mandinka is a Muslim tribe. So that Mandinka in Louisiana, in the Louisiana Delta where the movie is set, in all likelihood was a Muslim. And when, anyway, Sylviane Diouf talks about that in her book, Servants of Allah, African Muslims Enslaved in the Americas. I refer you to the book because my time has expired. So I want to leave some time for question, answer, conversation. So I guess I invite our dear brother Ahmed back to the stage and he'll take a seat. And you guys are already seated. So don't, I was going to say don't get up and leave, but someone was getting up to leave, but I don't want to discourage them. So I'll just say salam alaikum. If you have to leave, just please leave. That didn't come out right. If you must leave because of the rigorous demands of a Georgetown academic program, just leave quietly. That's all. It's like the Eid prayer. You know, you don't have to stay for the Quran. But if you don't stay in the back and talk, just quietly leave. Allah bless you all.
So first off, thank you for actually using the QR code because we have some questions for both of you guys. But also, we'll take questions, just like live questions to the audience if you guys want. And then we'll use this as well. So first, I'll open up to the audience. If anyone has a question, they can just raise their hand and then stand and ask for either of the speakers. And then if not right now, we'll get straight to this. Okay, go ahead.
What do you think the role of Muslims are today? How do we move forward from here?
So briefly, assalamu alaikum. America is so divided. There is so much conflict politically, socially, and Muslims have solutions, unique solutions to many of the problems of America. So, for example, you just give the economy, right? We have this ridiculous system where our housing market rises, falls, crashes because of the danger of interest-based debt, right? Trapping people into homes they can't afford, businesses feeding off of people, banks feeding off of people. You know, we have an alternative system that could work much better than this interest-based system of debt that we use to finance our economy, right? We have a solution there. It could help. Social issues, right? From abortion and this and that, we have nuanced, moderate, reasonable perspectives on these issues that people are just at odds about that could really provide a way for the American people to find a middle ground, right? Between the extremes of left and right. Foreign policy. Our nation, goes between fighting these ridiculous wars overseas or just being isolationists who don't care about horrible things happening to innocent people around the world. We have solutions, suggestions, and ideas about how we can have a balanced, humane, just foreign policy around the world. So I think Muslims in America are in a unique position because we're in a time, this is not normal in human history, we're at a time where we live in a country where you can practice Islam freely and openly. That was not the case in many places around the world in most of Muslim history. And we can not only practice Islam, we can speak up. We can advocate for what we want without fear of being thrown in jail or shot or killed for the most part. And more than that, we can actually influence who gets elected to office, which again is unique in human history. And we live in the most powerful country in the world. So we have the ability to influence and positively impact so many people. So I just think we have this amazing opportunity to do good here and abroad, and also major responsibility, right? If I was living in a Muslim country where I couldn't speak up without getting thrown in jail, I can contribute to the public discourse. I don't really have that much responsibility because I can't do much. But here in America, in this country, we can live so freely and enjoy so much. We can practice our faith. We have a great responsibility, I think, to try to direct our country, our society in a more positive way, and provide a healing voice in a very divided country.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. I would qualify what you mentioned, Ahmed. The interventionism or the isolationism that expresses a lack of concern for what happens to people. I think our interventionism also expresses a lack of concern to what happens to people. I think they much prefer our isolation so they can begin to work out their own problems without being bombed and strafed and starved and otherwise seeing their societies destroyed. I think the greatest thing we can do is just learn our religion and then follow it so that there is something identifiably Muslim that we can pass on to posterity. I think that's critically important because if we know our religion and we follow our religion, we will make positive contributions sooner or later to the direction of this society. But if we capitulate and we become just an Islamic veneer of some right-wing or left-wing solutions that are not just destroying the world, are destroying human beings, then there's no alternative for people. So we should see ourselves, and this is something Malcolm talked about in his famous letter from Mecca, in terms of what Islam can offer in terms of the race problem in this country. Arnold Toynbee talked about that also in his essay, Islam, the Future, Islam, the West and the Future, in his book, Civilization on Trial. He talked about what Islam can offer the West in terms of a potential source of salvation from the destructive forces of racism and also from the destructive forces of alcoholism. And we could say by extension, opioid addiction, just plain opium addiction, heroin, crack, the rest of it. So, but if we're not authentically Muslim and Muslim in a way that's recognizable, if our prophet were to come back, then what does humanity have except to all be consumed by what Dr. Abdul Hakim Murad describes as the monoculture? So as Muslims, we just become a part of this hegemonic, European-rooted cultural experiment that's destroying humanity. So I think we have to be Muslim. And then we have a foundation to do those things that Brother Ahmed so beautifully and poignantly identified as we having the opportunity and the potential to do.
Okay, so next we'll take a question that was submitted. This one's for Imam Zaid, but obviously feel free. So what role do Muslims have in disrupting the monopoly that right-wing evangelicals have on the conversation about faith and morality in the public sphere, especially when social justice allies on the left are often leery of religion and spiritual talk?
I would challenge the premises of that question. If you say that the right wing has a monopoly on the religious conversation, that means that atheism and the war against tradition on the left has no religious implications. So I would say we have a responsibility to be totally independent and to support all of those forces, be they on the left or the right or in the center, ideally in the center, because we're the middle nation, that are advocating for expressions of life, family, that have been historically influenced by healthy religious practice and principles. So I think that's our responsibility as Muslims, but to take an approach that says we're inherently, as is implied by that question, aligned with the left against the right. I think that we're not aligned with anyone. We're aligned with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's who we're aligned with. And we advocate for whatever is consistent with what has been revealed and what has been identified by subsequent generations of scholars as the normative practices, principles, and ideas and ethics of our religion. That's what we're aligned with. And whoever chooses to align with any of that, ahlan wa sahlan wa marhaban. But I don't think we align with the left or the right, especially in this highly polarized, situation we find ourselves in. Then there's no middle community.
I'll add to that briefly. So yeah, I completely agree with what Imam Zaid said. I just add that in reality, what has happened, I think, over the past 10 years is most Muslim organizations and leaders have very firmly aligned ourselves with the political left. And the reason for that is partly because the Republican Party, the political right, went so openly anti-Muslim, just so hostile to Muslims in the years, not even with Donald Trump, but even before that, but especially with Donald Trump, that it really put Muslims who grew up in the past 20 years in a place where the only people who were nice to them were people who were the left or liberals or all that. And so they found comfort and friendship and partnership there. But what they didn't realize is that that partnership would come at a cost, that people on the left, and this is not all people, but many people on the left will only embrace Muslims so far as we do not contradict what people on the left believe or embrace, right? It's not allyship, right? And I never use the word. I have no allies. I never use the word ally because it's not an unlimited loyalty, right? It's limited. And I'll give you one example. Actually, I won't give you an example because you might know what I'm talking about if I take this example. It's a relatively prominent elected official. But just to make it very vague, there was an elected official, Muslim, not El someone else, who very Democrat, very popular, recently elected. And this individual was approached by some of her supporters, and she was asked to essentially renounce an aspect of Islam. And to renounce in a way to make herself align with something that people on the left wanted her to embrace. And she said no. In fact, I'll just tell you what it is, because I leave with her. So the issue was, it was an issue with the LGBT community. This politician supported policy goals that this community wanted, but they wanted to go further. They wanted her to say that Islam has no issue with sexual relationships outside of men and women. And she said, look, I'm going to support you on this policy goal, that policy goal, but I can't say that. I'm a Muslim, I just can't do that. And hopefully you can understand that, it's my faith, but we can work together on this. And that was not acceptable to them. She came under vicious attack, almost lost her position because she was not willing to compromise on that one little thing. She actually wanted to give them everything else in terms of policy, but she wasn't willing to renounce one aspect of her faith, right? And that has happened, I think, with many other issues. That's just one example. Many other issues where Muslims have been confronted with people they thought were their allies, thought understood and respected their faith, but it only appeared to be so because the moment a conflict arose, it was, oh, no, you're not the right kind of Muslim. That's not acceptable to us. And so I say that to say that, yes, I still find people on the left are much less hostile to Muslims, obviously, much more open to collaboration, align with us on probably more issues than the so-called far right. But the extremes of both of these sides pose a serious threat to, I think, the Muslim community in different ways. And I think, as Imam Zaid said, we just have to be independent. We can't be anyone's just allies. We can be partners on issues of which there is shared concern, whether it's conservatives, liberals, atheists, Christians, whatever, if you're on the right side of something, I'm happy to join you on the right side of that one thing, but I'm not your ally. I'm not your servant. And I'm going to be willing to disagree with you on other things, and you got to live with that. And if you don't want to work with me, that's fine. We can just part ways, and I'll go find someone else to work with, or just do it on my own. But I will tell you, this is the fight that we are facing, and I've seen this being enacted now for almost 10 years, that the Muslim community is under intense pressure, especially politics, to either shut up about things that contradict what the left wants us to do, or to fully embrace it. And we all know what the threat is from the right, because they're so open about it. It's all in public, take away your rights. And I mean, if you talk about that, it's so well known, right? They don't hide it at all. It's what was it Malcolm who said the wolf versus the wolf versus the fox, right? So it's nothing new. But this is the fight that we're having behind the scenes, I will tell you. And it's a very it's something that I'm not convinced we're winning that fight right now, honestly. But these discussions, I think, help, because we have to confront the elephant in the room.
And as we're discussing this, and Brother Tariq San went up, I think I agree with Brother Ahmed. He mentioned, don't see yourself as victims. And, you know, he doesn't use the language of allyship. That there's a whole jargon that we as Muslims, and this is my personal opinion, I could give you, if we had time, the foundations for that opinion, but language provides the prism through which you view reality. And one of our prayers, Allahumma arina al-haqqa haqqan warzuqna ittiba'ah. Ya Allah, bless us to see truth as truth and bless us to follow it. And so the prism of language is critical in how we view reality. And so if it means supporting someone means adopting their language, this whole language of intersectionality and allyship and patriarchy as is defined by those folks, and this whole language, victimization, we have to avoid this, prefer pronouns, all this stuff. These are, no matter how intellectually deep it is, it's an intellectual fact. And the proof of that, no Muslim on the face of this earth 10 years ago was using that language. There's not a Muslim on the face of this earth who's using that language. And I guarantee you 20 years from now, there'll be very few Muslims using that language. And so when we become involved in these intellectual fads, it veers us away from the natural trajectory of Islam and our own particular Muslim social context. And we set ourselves back 20, 25, 30 years. And so when those fads are abandoned, we're left washed up on the shore, having to somehow, because the people who don't have a commitment to a deeper philosophical foundation other than liberalism at the end of the day and individualism, they just move on to the next fad. And so the people who are talking about economic deterministic Marxism, no one talks about that anymore. And how the economic substructure determines the social cultural infrastructure. No one uses that language. No one thinks like that. People who are deeply, Freud is very influential, but very few people would describe themselves as a Freudian today. And you could just go down the line. And a lot of the things that a lot of Muslims are embracing right now along those lines, when history moves on, we could be like Kunta Kinte and the people in that village. We just always adhere to our Islam, and here's good old Islam, and it sufficed us through that period. Or we can abandon our Islam in a de facto sense, and then when whatever we've embraced has either used us up or it's used up as a meaningful social, cultural, political reality, then we're left like just nowhere. Malcolm said we're like in Mr. In-Between. No one loves Mr. In-Between. We're between this and we're between that. And at the end of the, if you're between this and that, you're nowhere, because there's There's no third between this, that. Someone might say the other. But we don't want to be the other. This brother had his hand up.
Okay, well, like I said, one of the things is two individuals or two leaders that are like most known, include Martin Luther King, and but they are both Muslims and they held their position. So if the bar is at this level, why go down? Why are we going down? If Malcolm brought it up to the level, Muhammad Ali brought up to the level to stand on Islam, to be who they are, then that's what we should aspire to
And
be.
have a willingness to die for it.
Yeah,
If
and so
need be.
they set a standard. Look, I'm a Muslim. This I don't do this. I do this, and the people love them. So here it is. We have the proof of people that have that people know about. Everybody loves them, and we have that example. So, I mean, what you guys are talking about, these individuals that you're speaking about, they set an example. So that's what we should be moving towards. I mean, it's proven. Look at the results. Both of them died, and we're still talking about them today. They're Muslim, standing up for their Islam, and they don't want to compromise, never compromise. So that's the way to go, right?
Any other, or let me just read a quick question that's kept coming in, a pretty popular question for Imam Zaid. What is your fondest memory with Muhammad Ali?
My fondest memory was his reaction when I wrote this poem for him and read it to him. You want to hear the poem?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I was about to say that.
He floated like a butterfly and stung like a bee, the greatest fighter the world has yet to see. His opponents agree on one thing, they all got it right. In the ring with Ali, your life was in danger that night. Had he lived during the time of Jack Johnson, Joe Louis, Marciano, or Max Schmeling, his superiority over all of the former would be telling. Had he fought Tyson or Holyfield at the height of his career, on the list of heavyweight champions, their names would not appear. If Reindeer could box, he would have fought Downer and Blitzen. If presidents could fight, he would have whooped Richard Nixon. Where his right was filled with power and his left was relentless. He beat people so bad he had to engage in acts of repentance. So when you discuss who is the greatest heavyweight of all time, to mention any name other than Ali's is a crime. I didn't know that. That was one of our fondest memories. Another one is when we went to dinner in this restaurant in Louisville, and they had a mural of genteel. So that's right when you say genteel, you know what's coming. Genteel Southern life. And Ali, he could barely talk at that point, but he squeezed out. He said, "We're the black people." It was like Logan's Run. Some of y'all remember this Logan's Run. Logan's Run was like Star Trek kind of a movie. There's no black folks in it. It's like, how do they envision the future?
Next question, we'll take from the lady in the back.
For this wonderful presentation. So you had listed, Imam Zaid, a couple of titles of books. I got The Servants of Allah, Letter from Mecca, Civilization on Trial. What was you had mentioned the Old Islam?
Oh, Old Islam in Detroit.
Old Islam in Detroit. Are there any other titles that you can throw out there that you feel would be very beneficial for the audience to read?
Yeah, I think definitely Servants of Allah, Sylvian Diouf spoke. An abridgment of Alan Austin's voluminous research on Muslims in the Americas. So it's called African Muslims in the Antebellum South. Is incredibly useful. Some of Edward Blyden's book. What's the one on Afro civilization? Edward Blyden is a very important figure. Blyden, he was a missionary who tried to gain entrance into Queen's College around 1850s. Queen's College is the institution that would evolve into Rutgers University. So, but at that time it was a Christian school, and they refused to admit him as a student, but they said you could be a missionary and go to Africa. And so he he enrolled as a missionary and he went to Africa. And in Africa, he studied the way Islam united the various Muslim tribes and created a common culture. So, it's like that, for example, we mentioned the Mandinka, the Wolof, the Bambara, Tawarif tribes, and many other, the Hausa, Fulani, that all these different tribes were united in a common Muslim culture, transcending Muslim culture. And so Blyden, who was also a student of the Black Atlantic and the African diaspora, he began to envision Islam. There's a historical debate as did Blyden actually become a Muslim or not. But he gained a very favorable impression of Islam and its role in West Africa. And he began to envision Islam as a unifying glue that could hold together the African people and the wider Black Atlantic African diaspora. And so what that did, that created a very favorable view amongst for Islam in African American intellectual circles as you move into the 1880s and 90s. And that really provided sort of the intellectual culture that made possible the movements that would come later, such as Noble Drew Ali and the Moorish Science Temple, Marcus Garvey's movement and the Islamic influence in it, and then finally the Nation of Islam. And so Blyden's work is very, very critical in terms of being sort of a bridge from the disappearance of Muslim communities with the end of slavery. Because there were Muslim influences as long as slaves were coming from Africa. So slaves like Kunta Kinte or Ayyub bin Sulaiman, Abdul Rahman, Ibrahim Abdul Rahman, or Umar bin Sa'id, or Amatullah, one of the few Muslim women who we know something about her life and story, because most of the Muslim slaves were war captives. And so there were the men who were on the front lines in these battles. Particularly, if you look at Brazil and the role of Muslims in the slave revolts, especially the great 1836 slave revolt, most of those Muslims were from the armies of Uthman Dan Fodio, who had been captured and they were shipped to Brazil. And so they were fluent in Arabic, so they were able to communicate and develop an underground resistance in Arabic. And anyway, if via the Arabic language, and they almost succeeded. The Portuguese were tipped off at the last minute, and they lost the element of surprise and still almost succeeded in overthrowing the entire structure of Portuguese colonization, and particularly the area of Brazil along Recife and San Salvador. Anyway, that's a story for another day. But Blyden's books are really important historical documents, and someone could Google the title now. I don't have my phone, my computer's not on the internet. So those are some titles. Muhammad Ali, A Redemption Song is a beautiful book. Muhammad Ali in the Spirit of the 60s, the autobiography of Malcolm X, of course. DeCaro's book, A Religious Life of Malcolm X, to me, that's my favorite Malcolm X book, is A Religious Life of Malcolm X. So those are some, Jane Carew's Ghosts in My Blood, which really focuses on Malcolm's mother and provides perspective on the contributions of his mothers that you don't find, his mother that you don't find in a lot of literature. So those are some titles.
I'm gonna take one from the list real quick. So there's two questions about the same thing, but I'll say both of them because they're different aspects of it. And it's for both speakers, and one came in for each. Can you please speak about Imam Jamil and his wrongful imprisonment? And in comparing the current challenges of state persecution in relation to past state persecution, how do we reconcile the plight of Imam Jamil in relation to that of Malcolm?
So Imam Jamil al-Amin raise your hand if you know who that is. Everyone? Okay. So also known as H. Brown. So obviously very outspoken, famous civil rights activist, or really black activist from the 1960s, and then embraced Islam and became the leader of the West End Muslim community in Atlanta, and very well-known imam in that area. In the early 2000s, he was arrested and charged with shooting and killing a police officer, injuring another person. He was convicted in Fulton County after a trial that was unfair, to say the least. And then he was sentenced to prison in Georgia. Now, the story is interesting, but it's even more interesting because normally if you're convicted of a crime in the state, you go to state prison, right? What happened is in Georgia, obviously, when he went to the prison system, this very famous civil rights leader, very famous imam, people started converting to Islam in mass in the prison system. And he started becoming kind of a leader of people, leading them to change lives for the better. So Georgia did something unprecedented. They asked the federal government to take Imam Jamil and move him into federal custody. And the federal government took him out of state custody, sent him to, I believe, AdMax, which is the most secure prison in the country. It's where Kennedy McVeigh, the Unabomber, and all these other notorious criminals are. And while in prison, his health deteriorated horribly, and he's suffered extreme injustice. Now, the case that he's facing is even worse because he didn't do it. The person who actually committed these crimes is in jail for something else and has confessed over and over and over again under oath. Whoever actually committed the crime was shot during the incident. The one of the police officers got out of a shot, injured him, and the police officer testified as to what the man looked like, the fact that he shot him, no doubt. The man who has taken responsibility has a gunshot wound. He matches the description. He was there at the time. He is the person who actually did it. And yet Imam Jamil still sits in jail, rotting away. What he has experienced, this unprecedented federal intervention in this case, the rush to prosecute him and convict him, even though the evidence really did not substantiate the allegations against him. This is something that shows you that the efforts of the 1960s, 70s to target Black activists who were outspoken didn't end when the civil rights movement, quote unquote, ended, right? The government was still looking for an opportunity as soon as it arose to go after someone else. And so Imam Jamil is, I think, a horrible victim of the system that still is not rectified itself. We are actively, there are attorneys actively working on that. I'm in touch with his attorney. She's asked CARE for some help, which we're going to provide, inshallah. There have been protests and other efforts, and the Fulton County DA, who was recently elected, Fannie Willis, agreed to re-examine his case and consider calling for his release for a new trial. She is still looking at the evidence against him, has not made a decision yet. And so that's just kind of where things are now, and I'm sure Imam Zaid can share much more context and information.
Just a little context,
Please.
because I appreciate those remarks. Just a little backstory on the transfer. Like Imam Jamil wasn't just converting anyone in the prison. He converted the leader of the Aryan nation to Islam. And if you're familiar with American prisons, the system uses racial divisions to maintain control, divide and conquer. And that's just a microcosm of how the wider system in our country uses racial divisions. The birth of white supremacy in America is rooted in an effort to break up a powerful instance of transracial solidarity, which was represented in Bacon's Rebellion, where the white slaves at that point and the Black slaves got together and said, well, why are we fighting each other? We should be fighting the slave master. And when they did that, the slave master said, whoa, 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 whoa. Why are you fighting me? You're white like me. And you know what? You're no longer slaves. You're just poor white people. And they said, we're no longer slaves. We're better than the Black folks because they're still slaves. And that was really the root of birth of white supremacy. And whenever there's a serious effort to create solidarity between the whites, especially poor whites, and grassroots folks in the non-white community, is broken up. That's why, I would caution against going all in on this whole idea of people of color against all other people. because, you know, if you're a poor white person in Appalachia, the mother is strung out on heroin because until her husband died of black lung disease and a back so bad that he was eagerly prescribed and overprescribed OxyContin, and the wife started hitting that, and she's hooked, and then the husband died and the prescription ended, and so now she had to resort to heroin to maintain her habit. And one of the children, the son who had no opportunity to work anywhere except Walmart or join the war machine, chose the war machine and got killed in Iraq. And the daughter is pregnant with 2 children from 2 different guys, and she's an alcoholic. And then you come talk to them about white privilege. You know, we have to move beyond that. And we have to, when, you know, the whole idea, when you have larger numbers, so don't start tweeting out the wrong stuff. We have larger numbers. Twice as many white people are killed by the cops in this country as black folks. If you're African American, you're 5 times more likely, which is a national disgrace. But in raw numbers, there's twice as many white folks. And when they're not included by our efforts to rightly, justifiably call attention to these outrages such as which happened in Memphis, Tennessee, but they get no national press time, they get no highlighting, and then somebody starts yelling, "White Lives Matter," they're gonna go to those demagogues. So we have an opportunity to bring all these forces together, and nothing's gonna change until it all comes together. And so there are conscious efforts at every level, that level and every other level, to divide us. And that's not Islam. I'm sorry. Even we go all in, you got Jonathan Brown here. Jonathan Brown's been beat down so bad by the advocates of critical race theory or whatever you want to call it. That's our Muslim brother. And like Jonathan Brown and a lot of the white converts, they're questioning, like, you know, do people even want me in the community that I converted to, and in so doing became what Dr. Jackson refers to as a cultural apostate. White people who convert are becoming cultural apostates. And they're risking their family. Sometimes they're risking their lives. I know converts in Mississippi who had to leave the state. And so if that's what our community devolves into, you know, nothing's going to change. We're going to become part of the problem as opposed to being the solution, because we're going to contribute to the divisiveness, the polarization that exists as much as any other force. We're the solution. We're not part of the problem. And so I say that in all sincerity, that the status quo, how long has we been going around in these circles? Now, at what time, like Einstein's definition of stupidity was doing the same thing repeatedly and expecting a different outcome. So we've been going into these cycles of blame, of division for all of my life and before my life. And at what point do we like put the brakes on and say, hey, wait a minute, you know, we have to devise strategies, approaches, methodologies that bring us all together and that don't tear us apart. That's what Malcolm was about. That's what Malcolm was about. That's what Muhammad Ali was about. But Ali was about bringing people together. And a lot of people don't like that. A lot of people, they wanted the 1960s, 65 to 1970 Ali forever. That's what they wanted. That's what Jim Brown wanted. That's what Keith Powers and his pathetic reimagining of One Night in Miami, based on the figments of his imagination, that's what he wanted. And so because he didn't get that, he makes Malcolm and Muhammad Ali to the greatest, most dignified, self-confident look. He made Ali look like a clown and Malcolm X look like a punk. You know, and if that's what people, why? Because he didn't get the Malcolm that was able to write that letter from Mecca. He wanted the nation of Islam, white man is the devil Malcolm. And a lot of people want that Malcolm. But that's not what Allah gave us at the end of the day. And a lot of people want that, you know, ain't no Vietnam, Kong ever call me nigga. They want that Muhammad Ali. They don't want the Ali that can break down the barriers of division and reach all those white folks out there during his silence. They don't want that. And so, but that's what Allah Ta'ala, that's what history gave us. And we have to look at the fullness of our struggle and the fullness of the people who embodied that struggle to try to find new approaches to the hearts of human beings. At the end of the day, can you enter into a person's heart with enough sincerity, enough love, and enough appreciation of the common humanity to inspire them to change? And if we're telling people you're just inherently racist, when they think, like, I'm not a racist, I voted for Obama twice. No, right? We know the fallacy involved in that, but they don't. And so when you're telling them, I don't care what you think, I'm telling you what you are. You just burned the bridge. So we're gonna have to like really think a little more deeply. This is my personal opinion. You could take it or leave it. I'm not saying you have to agree with me. You could say, you know, you could tweet, you could post, Facebook. I don't care, you know, but this is just how I see it after 67 years of being on this planet.
So we're running out of time, so we're gonna try to take 2 questions and then end it. Who had their hand up the longest? Oh, my brother right there.
A question I had for the both of you, and I wanted to go back to your words in the beginning, in terms of compromises. So when you guys are building the bridges, just in terms of humanity, from like, you know, when you guys are building the bridges for Muslims with other communities and minorities, you guys spoke of compromises. So what compromises, don't you guys feel like you do have to make compromises to build those bridges? But at the same time, I heard you say that sometimes we do make a lot of compromises where we shouldn't be doing them. So it's like, where's that balance in compromise? And I don't know if I worded that correctly, if you guys understood what I meant. But I just feel like sometimes, for the most part, we feel like we have to compromise, and then we find ourselves again just following from the next compromise, one thing to the other, to the other, to the other, to the other, as Imam Zaid said. And so where does that stop? And then another question is, when you guys feel like you, if you feel like you don't need to make a compromise, my question was, what obstacles do you guys face from within yourselves, like where you feel like our own community is not willing to stop making compromises with you guys as leaders, if that makes sense?
You go last. Yeah, last word. I'll go first. Let's get the last word. I'll try to be brief. I think I'm speaking from a Muslim perspective. I think it is very important for us not to divorce like our social struggles, which are real. And so it's not a question of compromise, it's a question of principle compromise. Compromise is consistent with our principle, and then knowing when we're violating our principles, then it's time to stop and reassess what we're doing. But what I wanted to say is, discussing these issues as a Muslim, devoid from the historical goals of Muslim spirituality, which inform this anti-colonial struggles. Like someone like, oh, you talk spirituality, or you want us to be pacifist, but all these great spiritual masters, Umar Mukhtar, Hassan Abdullah in Somalia, Shamal Dagestani, the Sanusiya, Umar Paul, and Ahmed Bamba, peacefully but very powerfully in Senegal. Like these people were spiritual masters who we're talking with Abdullah about Sheikh Bu'amana, who was the leader of the Shadiliya Sheikhiyya spiritual order, but he fought the French from 1881 until 1908 in southwestern Algeria. So when we start talking about our engagement with the world and our struggles, and we divorce that from the goals of our historical spiritual systems, which was the effacement of the ego, so that there's no I'm compromising. There's only I'm giving myself to my Lord to use in ways that my Lord determines are best. Be that in the realm of struggle in society against the oppressive forces in society, be that in the context of my family, be that in the context of just my personal life, that I'm trying to remove the I so that I don't see myself compromising, or I don't see myself as engaging in anything that's going to serve myself. I only want to see myself as an embodiment of the will of my Lord. And that becomes a foundation that I engage the world from. And so I think when we divorce that whole spiritual side of it, we get into dangerous territory where we can do more harm than good. A very quick example, the story of, again, in Algeria, Abdul Qadir al-Jazairi, Amir Abdul Qadir. He fought the French. He was a warrior, spiritual warrior, but he wasn't fighting them for anything that would ostensibly benefit himself. He fought them to remove a wrong as defined by Sharia. And when he saw that his continued resistance would lead to unnecessarily death and destruction on both sides, he stopped fighting because he wasn't personally invested in that struggle for himself. He was doing it for the pleasure of his Lord. And that became seeking the pleasure of his Lord. That became the determinant as to whether I fight or not fight, and not I'm weak, I'm scared, I need allies, I don't need allies, I can stand alone. The I is taken, I can stand alone, I need allies, I'm weak, I'm strong. The I was taken out. And the who was accentuated, and we're still talking about him today. There's a city in Iowa, El Qadir, it's Elkader, Iowa. And they have the Abdul Qadir Museum where they recognize the unique chivalrous nature of his struggle. And so that's what we need. And so further.
Very, very brief, because I want to make sure we have time for the question. So I think there are two types of compromises that as Muslims, especially activists, we're making. One is to just openly support something that's wrong, do something that's wrong for the sake of being popular. So we have some Muslims who literally will go to Israel on trips sponsored by anti-Palestinian groups, take a tour, go to places that Palestinians can't go, and they do that to be popular, to get ahead for whatever reason, right? So it's just been openly doing something wrong for the sake of your personal benefit, or even sometimes some warped sense of this is interfaith dialogue and we're building relationships and something like that. Yeah. And then on the flip side of that is the compromise of just being quiet, like seeing something wrong and just not doing anything about it or saying anything about it. This is something I've been guilty of. I think many Muslim organizations have been guilty of. Is we're not going to do something wrong. We're just going to ignore that issue and be quiet about it and focus on other things that aren't going to ruffle anyone's feathers, right? And so I think those are two types of compromises. Neither is good. I think one is worse than the other, arguably. But that's, I think, what I'm seeing most often. I think we have to break the habit with both of those things. And as Imam Zaid said, if we can just, Allah remove from our hearts the fear of people, if we can just have that focus that Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X had and others had, that we're just doing this for the sake of God, of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we'll be okay in the end. You might be unpopular or hated for a while, but eventually, as brother here noted, Muhammad Ali is one of the most beloved people in the world. Malcolm X even, very widely respected. People who aren't Muslim, Martin Luther King was hated at the end of his life. You may not know this. Unpopular, negative opinion polls among most Americans, even in the Black leadership, he had been ostracized because he started speaking up against the Vietnam War and started speaking up for radical economic change. Even he was hated, but of course now beloved. So the point is that, yeah, it's not always, it doesn't seem easy to stop making these two mistakes, but may Allah grant us the strength to stop. And again, I think this will ultimately benefit people in this country and ourselves and people around the world, inshallah, if we can do it, inshallah.
Okay, so, I'll be getting a lot of pressure from the presidents that we have to wrap up. So I'm just doing what I'm saying. So
These are law students. They're used to staying up late, getting ready for their exams, outlining others.
before we end, just a couple announcements before I thank the speakers. The National Muslim Law Student Association is having their annual conference from March 17th, March 19th. So please keep that in your calendars. And we're going to have a socialized event at DW on February 24th. So also keep that in your calendar. And then I just want to say thank you to both of our speakers.